Hot new, limited, imported Christian rock. That's what we got tonight. Stick around. Hey, Jeff here. So, got a new vinyl in the mail today and a couple from the other day that I wanted to show. The one that came in today is the topic of the discussion mainly. And most you probably don't know, only those elite of us who are old enough to remember and listen to this kind of music back in the day would probably know this unless you're a collector. But Emerald, Armed for Battle. And this is a Christian hard rock band from 1986. Now, and there's neat all kinds of pictures here. Now, I remember I had this album, the actual vinyl, back in the day when it came out. The thing that was interesting about this at the time, okay, for those of you, again, who may not have been there during the Christian rock and metal movement of the 80s, it started in the mid 80s. So, you had Stryper that pops up around 84-ish. They started getting popular in 85. You have other bands that are starting to come out, Barren Cross, Blood Good, Messiah Prophet, Saint. And so you have this, the bunch of bands that are coming out. Most of them early on were releasing just demo tape, what we call demo tapes. They were really indie release cassette tapes. So it was not the most common form of Christian rock and hard rock in those days were buying through the mail cassette tapes of these bands. Very few record labels gave them the time of day. Very few bands had record labels. And then in comes, this band Emerald that, unless you're in California, I was living at the time, I guess, in Mississippi, you didn't really hear much about. So you're looking in magazines and you're like, hey, here's a new, Christian hard rock band. I was going to order their cassette. Wait a minute. What do you mean? They're on vinyl? Because only bands that had gotten signed, which were very few at the time, had vinyl. So I thought that was really significant at the time, that here's a demo band or an indie band that had a vinyl out. So this has been reissued just recently. Record label in Greece. I'm not sure why the band chose to go that route. If it was just a deal they couldn't pass, rather than going with like having a Rocks or reissue or retroactive reissue. But alas, it has been reissued, very limited quantities. I forget, a few hundred, by a label, No Remorse, over in Greece. And thankfully, Bill over at Rocks Records got his hand on like 12 copies of it. And I was one of the first ones to say, yes, I want one of those. And so it came in the mail today. And I listened to it, and it sounds phenomenal. It's been, I don't know if it's been remastered or anything, but the vinyl pressing is very well done. It comes with the cover looks just like it did back in the day. It just, I don't, aside from the extra tracks, it looks and feels like I remember it being. Here's a picture of the band. They had that 80s rock look. Big drums, big hair, and all that stuff. And it comes with the neat inner, it's not a sleeve actually, inner sheet of paper that has a bunch of pictures of the band through the years and some information, a little letter there from the originator of the band. And then the backside has the lyrics. So it's a very well done package. It's just sadly it's either hard to get at import prices, or it's going to be, I think it's pretty much out of print now. It went out of print like very quickly, but glad to have it. Now, a few years back, 2001, I see, wow, that was a long time ago, it was released on CD. It was actually a double CD with Oracle, Sela, on Magdalene or M8 Records distribution, Magdalene Records. And it had the entire, this vinyl is actually an EP. It had 6 songs. So it has 6 songs. And then the band had 2 more songs that were on the California Metal 2 album. So they added those, giving it, 8 tracks. Now this particular vinyl release has 2 bonus tracks. One of which is Trader, which is from the California Metal 2. Whether that's the exact same recording or not, it says it was recorded from this time period. But that is on there, and then Born to Die, which is not the other bonus. The other bonus is Vengeance is Mine, which I have not. I don't recall ever hearing before, because I have a demo or a series of demos by the band from before this vinyl came out, and that's not one of the songs on the demo. So I'm not sure where that song came from. I kind of thought I had most of the material they had, and it's not on this. So that's nice to have an extra track there. I just wish I could get it on CD or something digital, but I guess I'll just rip a copy from there so I can have it on my computer. One thing that to point out about this release is the bass player is Roger Dale Martin. Now, again, if you know anything about the things at this time frame, he later went on to be the bass player for Vengeance, which changed her name to Vengeance Rising, and then he went on to be in Die Happy. So this was one of his earlier bands, early recordings. So that was kind of neat. I mean, it's not anything like the style of Vengeance, which was one of the first almost death metal Christian bands. But anyway, Roger Dale Martin appears on this, which is really neat. Now, the other interesting thing about this release, at least to me, Oracle Selah is an album that I mean, it was a CD back in the day. I think I had it on cassette. But phenomenal, pretty much progressive type band. I loved this band back in the day, and I think I even reached out to them and talked to them at one point. This was reissued on vinyl by Rocks on their little, their series where they only print, 150 or so. But it came out in 2016. I think it was, number 3 in the Rocks Collector Series. It came out at the end of 2016. I didn't start buying vinyl again until the early May or so of 2017. And by that time, either it was already out of print or I didn't act fast enough, because it's out of print now, and upwards to hundreds of dollars people are asking for it. So that's kind of one of my, at this point, even though it's not that old, that would be kind of one of my grails to eventually get that on vinyl, the number 3 of the Rock series. It's just interesting that that's on here, and both of these have now been reissued on vinyl. Anyway, so I have that. Now, I don't know if you all have these in your town. We have a chain record store, music store called FYE. They're in malls. They're outside of malls for your entertainment. It's one of those stores, at least for me, where I just go to window look. I go and shop, but I never buy unless they absolutely have a sale, because they are, one of those mall stores that are way overpriced on everything. Occasionally they'll have, some things marked off, half off in certain bins, and you might find a deal. But for the most part, CDs, vinyl, everything is skyrocketing in their prices. For instance, when I first started getting back into vinyl, I went over there and looked, and they had the first few Kiss albums, which are single discs, reissues. They have them for $45. Well, 2 years later, I went in there and they still had the same copies for $45. But anyway, the one that's, I don't know if they're all closing or just the one in town that is not in the mall, it's in a shopping center, is closing. So, everything's 30 to 70% off. I went in there a week or two ago, and the vinyl was 30% off. I flipped through, and the things that I might have been interested in, 30% off still wasn't as cheap as the normal price on Amazon. So I just ridiculous. Went back a week or so later, because they had candy and some things that kids wanted for really cheap. Get some cheap headphones and stuff for the girls. But went back in, and now the vinyl was 40% off. So I'm like, okay, well, let's take a look. I found a couple that I kind of wanted, and I did the math, and I'm like, okay, well, this is cheaper now than Amazon prices. I mean, we're not giving them away, but hey, they're cheaper than I can buy them new anywhere else. So I thought, well, I picked up a couple. I'm like, do I really need to buy these? Do I have the money for this? Should I buy these? Blah, blah, blah. My wife was like, just buy them. Be like a late Christmas present for yourself. Treat yourself. The prices are cheaper than you've seen them anywhere else, new. So go ahead and get them. So there were a few that I left behind, and I'm hoping maybe I'll go back in a week or so. They'll be 50% off. But still, the prices were outrageous on a lot of things that I did want. But these were pretty good scores. Nothing fantastic here. Most people already probably have these, but hey, they were good scores for me. So, Riot's Immortal Soul. I have digital tracks of these. I downloaded from the time it came out. Really enjoyed this album. Now, this would be the Riot, technically the Riot 5. I don't think it says on there, but the band, adds a number there. So I saw this in that FYE probably 2 years ago, and the price wasn't bad. I think it listed for like it was like $25. Now it's a German import. It's 2 discs, so it's master real nice. They're colored. Is it blue? Blue colored. So, and it's an import. And I was thinking, well, that's really not a bad price for it, but it wasn't high on my list. Well, $25. 40% off. So I'm like, okay, I'll go ahead and grab this because that was worth it. And like I said, it was an import and everything, and I'm like, oh, that was good. I like this album, so I'm really looking forward. I want to get their newest album on vinyl, but that is on my list at some point. Then a couple of these, I just grabbed these because I'm like, they were good prices. I picked up Metallica's Ride the Lightning because I saw this the other day in a Guitar Center in a music store, and they have vinyl. And I went up there and said, "How much is this?" And he's like, $25. Like, are you kidding me? You can get this for $18 any time of day, pretty much everywhere. Well, they had it at FYE for $18. Well, $18.99, which was hard to believe because FYE would normally be a Guitar Center $25 price. But so $18, take off 40%. You're getting it down for just a little over 10. And I needed this to. I'll cover that in a minute. But this was one of the top 3 that I needed to get to fill my selection. And then they also had the Justice for All. This one is a double vinyl, and it was retailing for like $30. But Anyway, so I thought I'd go ahead and grab this. It was still going lower than the Amazon price, so I grabbed that. Kind of fills out the top 4 have-to-haves of Metallica, and then they had Hardwired to Self-Destruct. Now I already have like the Super Deluxe, DVD version of this, like 3 discs or so. But this is a double vinyl. Would love to have the box set, but none of the Metallica box sets are anywhere in my price range. So this was listed at $30. I thought that was still, you're talking 20 something dollars now, under 20 something. But then I got up there and found out that for some reason it was marked 30, but it was actually only 25 and minus whatever. Ended up getting this for like $15. So that to me was a good score because I saved a couple extra dollars. And this is a really good album, and I enjoyed it, so I grabbed that. Now what I was saying is, I've been wanting to get Ride the Lightning because I already had Master of Puppets and the first album, and to me I wanted to have those 3. Technically, and Justice for All would be 4th, but these 3. Honestly, really just the first 2. The first 2 albums I bought. These first 2 albums I had as a teen. I bought this when I was in high school. When on the East Coast, nobody really had heard of Metallica. I hadn't even heard of them. But it was back in the days when I would go in the store and buy anything that looked like it was hard rock or metal. Really, I was kind of looking for anything with spandex and bandanas and hairspray. But I kept running across this album and the band, and anything on Megaforce. These were the days when I was starting to get into bands like this and Exciter and some of the bands that were on the label at the time. And these guys weren't obviously the glam type bands, but after a while, these guys, Raven, there were some bands like that. Just anything in the indie section is what it was, where it was not the bigger labels. And I remember buying this and just flipping out. And my best friend, who was with me along the way listening to music, we were big Kiss fans and Def Leppard, Motley Crue, Iron Maiden, everything. I had that album. He didn't really connect with it. But we used to, back in the day, we would spend time out playing Frisbee in the street. And we'd crank up music on the box radio. And I remember cranking that up. And he went in the house, and I'm out there in the street doing these, air guitar solos. And he's looking at me thinking, you're crazy. He just didn't get it. Well, it didn't take much before, months later, the whole world was getting it. And so, but I had jumped on the bandwagon early on, fell in love with this album. I had all of the 12 inches, Jump in the Fire, Phantom Lord, all of the various picture discs and stuff that, well, I don't think there were any picture discs, it was mainly just 12 inches. Then I joined the military, and this album came out, and again, bought it, had all the different Creeping Death picture discs and different singles and stuff back in the day when I collected all that. And of course, this continued legacy that started with Kill 'Em All as being just one of my favorite albums. These two, I just absorbed and played to death. And honestly, by the time this one came out, I kind of had started making that move away in my life from this type of music and started kind of getting straight with my faith. Wasn't listening to a lot of this, and so this album came out, and it was probably a couple years before I ever bought it. So it doesn't hold as nostalgic of a place in my life as the first two. But of course, I then fell in love with it a couple years later and everything. Justice for All, same thing. It was quite a few years later before I even ever listened to this. I remember going into the record store in the mall when this first came out, and they had it up on the wall and they were playing it, and I listened to it. And I know the mix is a big issue in this, but I heard it when it first put it on and thought it sounded atrocious. The drums sounded isolated. They sounded too out in the front. The rest of the music was so subdued. The mix was horrible over the speakers in the store, and that just one song, I'm like, no interest at all. It took years before I ever went back and listened to this to fall in love with it. It turned me off. Now, I know the whole thing with the bass and everything, and there's been a recent CD release where they've turned the bass up. It'd have been nice if they'd have went in and fixed that before they, released the reissue remaster. But it is what it is. It's a great album. I do like it now after, many years of listening to it. It's been years. So that's great. So that's about it for now. Yeah, that's about it. Those were the few things that I had. I'd kind of forgotten about the Emerald one, and I was glad that popped in today. I said, hey, let's do a video. Anyway, thanks for watching, and, like, subscribe, do all that fun stuff, and thanks a lot for coming around. Rock on.